The year is 1918. The city is Birmingham, a landscape choked with factory smoke and the relentless noise of industry. In a courtroom, where justice was often a quick, brutal affair, a woman stood before the bench for what must have been her 80th or so appearance. Her name was Alice Tatlo, and the judgment, delivered by Detective Bess, was a sentence that would brand her for eternity, one of the worst characters in Birmingham. It was a shocking summary for a life that, by its end, would tally over 110 court appearances. But to accept that verdict is to miss the staggering, tragic contradiction at the heart of Alice's existence. We must erase the image of the slum dweller, the habitual drunkard, and the petty thief. Alice Tatlo's life did not begin in the darkness of the industrial underworld. It began with the regal, sun-drenched prestige of the British Empire. Our investigation starts with a rare, official document, a birth record from the British India Office. It etched the details that defied her later reputation. Alice Maud Tatlo, born August 27, 1877, in Jhansi, Bengal. Jhansi was no ordinary colonial outpost, it was a critical military garrison, a central hub for the British Army. Alice was a soldier's daughter. Her father, John Tatlo, was an armorer sergeant in the 109th Regiment of Foot. This was a man of skill, responsibility, and standing within the rigid military hierarchy. Alice's earliest memories would have been defined by order, the sound of the bugle, the measured tread of boots on the parade ground, and the strict adherence to discipline. Her first 5 years were a lesson in absolute control. That single detail, her birthplace stamped as India, was an imperial badge, a guarantee of respectability that should have been hers forever. But destiny, or perhaps the forces of empire itself, had a different plan. The first crack in Alice's foundation occurred when the family left the clean, manicured order of the Aldershot Barracks. They relocated to the beating, chaotic heart of industrial England, Birmingham. This was the antithesis of the garrison life, a city of suffocating smog, deafening industry, and aggressive competition. The sheer volume and speed of industrial life must have been a terrifying culture shock for a girl raised in the contained, predictable environment of a military cantonment. But the real trauma was internal. The 1891 census reveals the catastrophic social shift. Alice's mother, Mary, is listed as the head of the household. Her older brothers are already working in the brass fountain trade. But Sergeant John Tatlo is gone. While the demands of the army often separated families, for Alice, on the verge of her teens, the discipline anchor was suddenly severed. She was left to navigate the brutal clamor of the inner city under the guidance of a mother, suddenly burdened with the demands of an industrial life, without the rigid, moral framework of the army. This emotional and psychological void was the fertile ground for her descent. By 1901, the respectable daughter vanishes, and a new figure emerges, identified by the desperate measure of an alias. A young woman named Violet Beardsmore appears in court records, charged with public drunkenness. The court noted her profound distress. She was already seeking oblivion, using a borrowed name to hide the shame. The soldier's daughter was losing her identity, adopting an alias to hide the shame of a life collapsing under the weight of an unmanageable city. The years between 1904 and 1913 are the core of Alice's tragedy, a relentless spiral into self-destruct. By 1904, she was entrenched in the margins, witnessing a fatal street brawl, placing her squarely in a world where violence was casual and life was cheap. Then came the moment of ultimate crisis, the moment her despair became a matter of public record. Alice was arrested for the specific crime of obtaining drink, while already listed on the habitual drunkard's blacklist, a legal death sentence for an alcoholic. But what happened in the police cell at Moe Street was far more horrifying. A constable found her unconscious, a piece of tape tied tightly around her neck. Attempted suicide was a crime in 1904. This was not petty crime, it was a desperate scream for help, met only with further condemnation. The cycle quickly hardened. By 1906, with 23 previous convictions, she was stealing watches from drunken men. The irony is agonizing. The victim of addiction became a predator on those who shared her fate. The darkest revelation of this period exposed her profound vulnerability. In 1913, a man named Arthur Franklin was convicted for living on the earnings of Alice Tatlo. The cold legal term concealed a horrific reality. Alice was selling her body to survive, and tragically, was funneling her desperate wages to the very man who exploited her. She was a slave to her circumstances and to the vice that had consumed her. The grief and despair peaked dramatically in 1914. At New Street Station, Alice chose the most public exit she could find, deliberately stepping in front of an oncoming engine. She was pulled back in the nick of time by a detective, but her words were the heartbreaking epitaph of her broken life. I want to die. I don't want to live any longer. Yet, despite the endless arrests, the scars of her inner life were etched into the very records that condemned her. The 1904 mugshot, the only surviving visual evidence, is chillingly detailed. It lists her tattoos: the true love, the heart, the clasped hands, permanent, visible symbols of a lost loyalty, a desperate clinging to an ideal of romance or faithfulness that her life continuously denied her. They were her tragic signature. By 1918, the branding was complete with Detective Bess's damning summary, but Alice possessed a spark of the sergeant's defiant spirit that refused to be extinguished. Even in her 109th court appearance in 1928, fined for drunkenness, the 48-year-old Alice mustered one last act of theatrical bravado. Of course I have. I can pay £50 or £100. It was a grand, albeit hollow, refusal to be utterly crushed by the system that defined her. The puzzle pieces finally connect decades later. The 1939 register provides the definitive smoking gun, Alice Tatlo's exact date of birth. is confirmed the 27th of August 1877, an exact match for the baptismal record from Jhansi, India. The child of the empire and the criminal of Birmingham were undeniably one and the same. She was listed in London, making a final, desperate attempt at domestic stability. The final press report is from 1943. Age 65, in wartime London, she was charged with stealing a wallet, using the same familiar decoy method. The struggle was relentless, the pattern unbroken. After this, the paper trail runs cold. The woman who was so visible to the authorities for decades, who had generated more records than almost any other female offender of her time, finally achieved the one thing she never had: silence. Her life was the terrible, tragic consequence of a deep societal fissure, the collision of imperial order and industrial chaos. Her story is a painful testament to the resilient, defiant, and profoundly damaged woman who fought a 4-decade war on the streets of Britain, and whose final end remains an enduring mystery.